FutureDad 39. Know your skin in the game. Quote, "The world we live in is vastly different from the world we think we live in." Nassim Taleb. This essay was inspired by the work of Nassim Nicholas Taleb. In my view, Taleb's insight into human bias is unmatched. He has helped me to understand that, essentially, our brains are corruptible simulation software, riddled with blind spots, and routinely self-reinforcing to evade those same blind spots. So one consequence is that, as you get wiser, it gets harder to turn that wisdom back on yourself. Without self-reflection, the smarter you get, the more you may succumb to bias, and ultimately hubris. Bias can also be positive, but still bias, when it stems from involvement in an activity. Taleb uses skin in the game, SITG, to determine how a person's participation in an activity's outcome influences their decision-making and competence in it. The difference between, say, donating your own money, you have SITG, to fund the production of Sesame Street in Iraq, or using taxpayer money, no SITG, to do it non-consensually. Or, as a recent personal experience of bad results from no SITG showed, when your local government inflicts a recycling scheme on you that wastes much more energy and time than it saves. In a nutshell, a commercial airline pilot has SITG. A military drone pilot does not. So in this essay, I intend to use a generalized form of SITG to determine bias, whether good or bad. This is important for investing. See FutureDad 28, How to Become Financially Free Part 1, and FutureDad 64, How to Become Financially Free Part 2. The foundational idea is, if you know your precise sensitivity to the outcome, either side of a debate, a situation, an investment, then you will know your full range of bias, no matter how subtle. How frequently do you stand back and identify your own SITG in a situation? The example of a controversial topic can provide fertile ground for analysis. A debate on the topic may be one or two steps, offline or online respectively, removed from real-life consequences, but it is very useful as a thought experiment. And since some blind spots can themselves be hidden, it is useful to assess SITG from many different angles, like multiple torches shone into a cluttered room. If you master this introspection, you will be more aware of when you exaggerate or lie by omission, especially given your own ego evades this to protect you. The end result being it may help you avoid costly bad decisions. Contentious topic examples we could use for this exercise are, say, welfare or Bitcoin. But if you have read FutureDad 11, Why is Government So Dangerous, or any one of a dozen other essays, you will be skeptical of my ability to be neutral on the topic of welfare. First lesson learned. Therefore, I will focus on Bitcoin as an example. Note, the permutations in this essay become complicated, and so I will require focus from you. Furthermore, the permutations are not exhaustive and are provided for illustration and to invoke deeper thought. Now, about 0.2% of my portfolio is exposed to Bitcoin at the time of writing, in an income-generating ETF, so I am not completely neutral about Bitcoin, but not sensitive to it either. It rises or it falls, and I don't care or follow its movement. I indirectly care because it is correlated with tech stocks, which I do own, a larger fraction, about 7% of my portfolio. I also indirectly care because I find Bitcoin bro boasting cringeworthy and incredibly tiresome. But simultaneously, I despise government, so I do admire the concept. All that being said, I encourage you to be on your guard against any bias creeping in during this discussion. This should be a short essay if conventional wisdom is applied. At the first derivative, it is simple. The way to know your SITG is by truthfully answering one question. Do you have a vested interest whatsoever on either side? Naively, your sensitivity to this topic is then, do you have a long or short position in Bitcoin? But full discovery of SITG requires more. We should also be interested in the second derivative. the full sensitivity to support, criticism, or silence on the topic. Instead of 2 questions, it becomes 12. So in full, instead of considering whether you have a bias about the topic of X, you should determine whether you benefit or suffer from supporting, criticizing, or staying silent on the argument both for and against X. Arguably, for the sake of brevity, the exercise could be compressed into just 6 questions, but for reasons of rigor, we list them out in full to see where it gets us. As you can see, there are 12 sources of SIT-G bias in total, not the standard 2, for and against. To easily understand why 12, the polarities are the stance for and against, which is 2, the declarative action of supporting, criticizing, staying silent, that's 3, the impact of do you benefit, suffer from, that's 2. So 2 times 3 times 2 is 12. So using Bitcoin as a proxy for any contentious topic, the list is as follows. 1. Do I benefit from supporting the arguments for Bitcoin? 2. Do I suffer from supporting the arguments for Bitcoin? 3. Do I benefit from criticizing the arguments for Bitcoin? 4. Do I suffer from criticizing the arguments for Bitcoin? 5. Do I benefit from staying silent on the arguments for Bitcoin? 6. Do I suffer from staying silent on the arguments for Bitcoin? 7. Do I benefit from supporting the arguments against Bitcoin? 8. Do I suffer from supporting the arguments against Bitcoin? 9. Do I benefit from criticizing the arguments against Bitcoin? 10. Do I suffer from criticizing the arguments against Bitcoin? 11. Do I benefit from staying silent on the arguments against Bitcoin? 12. Do I suffer from staying silent on the arguments against Bitcoin? 1. Do I benefit from supporting the arguments for Bitcoin? This approximates to the most well-known SIT-G of having material long position in the asset, but it is more than it appears at first glance. The original question is not, do you have SIT-G because you argue for Bitcoin, or do you benefit from arguing for Bitcoin? That doesn't allow clear separation of the person's stance from the consequence or impact of one's stance. It misses the declarative action dimension. Simply put, benefiting from supporting the arguments for X is not exactly the same as suffering from criticism from the arguments for X. That is why we spell it out with a full set of 12 questions. Another example for illustration. Say a person advocates for a public speaking technique on LinkedIn.com. Generally, we can say that they support the argument for better skilled public speaking. Let's say they're also selling the training on that technique. Now they benefit from supporting the argument for better skilled public speaking. When we take a step back, we see that there is a SIT-G when supporting the argument for it in the case of someone's business profiting from it. So far, so trivial. Let's continue with the Bitcoin case. 2. Do I suffer from supporting the arguments for Bitcoin? Trivially, you could have a short negative position in the asset and so suffer financially by voicing support of people who talk it up. This is a mirror image of 1, this time at a personal financial cost, so the polarity is reversed. 3. Do I benefit from criticizing the arguments for Bitcoin? This could be hidden SIT-G causing bias for a number of reasons. You may own a small amount and want to appear balanced and trustworthy for future traffic to your opinions, even though you would lose financially in the short term by suppressing supportive statements. There is a net reputational benefit. Another reason, when one holds an asset, people have a tendency to seek an emotional hedge. In the public speaking technique example above, maybe a person tried the training course and it was unsuccessful. They remain terrible at public speaking. So what does it do to speak out against that LinkedIn article? It fortifies one's ego to challenge that it is even possible to improve one's public speaking using such a technique. Likewise here, you may pretend to be philosophically against Bitcoin going up because of fear. The fear is strong enough to make you proactively evade pain by cosplaying the other side. 4. Do I suffer from criticizing the arguments for Bitcoin? Here your sit-G could be simple. Negative financial impact from a long position. Maybe you hold a smaller Bitcoin position than before. You previously supported arguments for it, but now you criticize them. You truthfully always had a theoretical reason to criticize arguments which support it, but you took profits, and now you can afford to suffer more from reputation than price rise. You begin to make such criticisms now out of face saving for your earlier pretense for longer term reputational gain. 5. Do I benefit from staying silent on the arguments for Bitcoin? This can be quite subtle. An analogy is, if asked about an opinion about a mutual friend's reliability and you state no comment, then depending on the conversation, this could be seen as a very damning evidence due to the deliberate insertion of absence of evidence that the third party is any good, when reasonably a viewpoint would have been expected. It's often more persuasive that the third party is unreliable than literally saying they're unreliable. Although that does depend on your own reputation. And you benefit by elevating your own reputation for being fair and measured and not decrying someone behind their back. In the case of Bitcoin, it's similar. If no significant asset position, there is reputational reward of avoiding sour grapes if Bitcoin goes up, or to seem magnanimous in victory if Bitcoin goes down. 6. Do I suffer from staying silent on the arguments for Bitcoin? This can of course be a long position sit-G, causing financial harm if you do not recruit people to your cause, which see the GameStop stock trading behavior of 2020. Here also the subtle bias is from the perception that the silence, if sudden, gives a perception that previous commentary was motivated entirely by self-enrichment. The damage is also, therefore, reputational. 7. Do I benefit from supporting the arguments against Bitcoin? This is most interesting from a comparative position viewpoint. Let's say you only support the arguments against Bitcoin, but do not criticize the arguments for Bitcoin, number 3. What are you conveying? That maybe you doubt the accuracy of the arguments for, but you do not understand them or cannot disprove them. So you passively support the opposite. The bias is incentivized by the inbuilt asymmetric mechanism of social media. Likes are easier and dislikes either non-existent, invisible, or require extra work. This sit-G is usually weaker than permutation 3. A common topic to fall in this category is man-made climate change or similar complex data-led discussion. You may decide that an eye-catching chart which supports it could be subject to many difficulties and its truth unverifiable. But you think you will look pedantic or ignorant of some technical issue if you point this out, and may lose credibility if you criticize it. I won't go there. It's easier instead to shoot it down with conceptual counter-arguments. Here it is less a commitment to the anti-Bitcoin, anti-climate change narrative. 8. Do I suffer from supporting the arguments against Bitcoin? Trivially, a signifier of a long position sit-G. If no position, there may be a fear of reputation loss if your previous stance was critical of or silent on arguments against. 9. Do I benefit from criticizing the arguments against Bitcoin? There is the obvious long position sit-G and hoping to fuel a price rise by neutralizing downward pressure. When vehement, this is a territory of the obsessed fanboy. Think Tesla, Bitcoin basically, who wants to crush dissent. This is mostly an online phenomenon. You could indeed here be advertising your interest in a subject without really knowing the subject, so perhaps you wish to gain reputationally amongst peers without doing the work. Think climate change, mass immigration, etc. Do I suffer from criticizing the arguments against Bitcoin? Trivially, you could have a short position sit G. You could also have no holdings and no apparent sit G, but be worried about the perception that you have nothing of substance to say in support of arguments for, and are supposed to. So now you're jumping in on the bandwagon of criticism, which is often easier argumentation online, but is intellectually damaging because it's ginned up and fake. 11. Do I benefit from staying silent on the arguments against Bitcoin? This passivity could mean that you enjoy the scorn being poured on the topic, especially if the argument is a rational and strong one, but do not want to enter the fray because it appears level-headed to do so. On the other hand, you may benefit because you have mild financial sick G, because emotionally you are rooting for its weakness because your investment ended up less than you initially planned or you already took profits. An example of sour grapes, even when you could still profit, because you would feel pain from regret. 12. Do I suffer from staying silent on the arguments against Bitcoin? This is a milder long position sit G, but also if you have a short or less long position, you might be perceived as not being principled if previously you were very vocally for it. Conclusion. So despite not exploring all the possible permutations, you can see how complicated this gets. The takeaway message is that emotional involvement is highly influential in a generalized sit G analysis, sometimes as much as the simple financial involvement. Observation of ego is crucial in both investment and debate. So, returning to our original question, what is your real sit G? FutureDad.